Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into some source material you've sent our way. It looks like excerpts from a podcast discussion, actually.
That's right. And the focus is pretty specific, tackling two big career milestones. First, getting through the, let's face it, notoriously tough PMP certification exam.
And second, actually using that certification to land a good project management job. So it's the exam and the interview process.
Exactly. The source gives us these accounts from two people who went through this, and their conversation really hones in on one resource they used, something called CertPassCenter.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward then. We need to pull out the key insights from their conversation. What were the challenges they were facing?
Right. And how did this resource, CertPassCenter, fit into their plan, according to them? What parts did they say were actually useful?
And crucially, what impact did it have? Did it help with the exam? Their careers. That's what we need to unpack from the source.
Yeah, we're looking for those moments the source highlights, like how they apparently got over some initial hesitation about using materials like these.
And that link they mentioned, the one between studying for the test and somehow being better prepared for job interviews, that sounds interesting.
Definitely worth exploring.
Okay, let's set the scene first. The PMP exam. Based on what these users in the source said, it sounds like a major hurdle.
Oh, absolutely. The source really emphasizes how rigorous it is. We're talking 180 questions, and
Yeah.
you've only got 4 hours to do them. That's quite the marathon.
4 hours. Just concentrating for that long is a challenge in itself. And the source mentioned something about the type of questions, situational ones being tricky.
That's a really critical point they made. It's not just about, spitting back definitions. It's about applying PM principles to these complex, almost real-world scenarios.
Which just sounds much harder.
It is. And they mentioned a pretty high failure rate in the source numbers, like 40, even up to 60%. That makes the stakes feel incredibly high.
Especially when you factor in the money. The source said it's, what, $400,000 if you're a PMI member?
Right. Project Management Institute member. And $555 if you're not.
Yeah.
So failing isn't just about losing study time. It's potentially hundreds of dollars down the drain. Plus you have to pay again.
Ouch. That pressure adds up.
Definitely. And the source describes one of the users. They'd spent months doing all the usual stuff, reading the PMBOK guide, that's the big official book, taking online courses, making flashcards.
The standard playbook.
Right.
Yeah.
But even after all that, they still felt really anxious, kind of unprepared for the real thing.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. You put in the hours, but the test itself just feels intimidating.
And the other person, featured in the source, they had a different problem. A full-time job, limited time. They needed something efficient, a way to maximize those study hours.
Which presumably is how CertPassCenter enters the picture based on the source material.
That's what the source indicates. They both found this resource. But the conversation is quite open about the initial, let's say, skepticism.
Ah, the whole dumps issue.
Exactly. That word dumps gets tossed around, and it often comes with this negative vibe, like you're just memorizing answers, maybe using dodgy materials, not actually learning.
So they had that hurdle to overcome first. What was it, according to the source, that made CertPassCenter feel different or more trustworthy to them?
Well, this seems key to their story. They said the materials weren't just lists of questions and answers. They described them as real exam-style questions.
Okay, exam style. That sounds more like legitimate practice. What else stood out for them?
Two things kept coming up in the source conversation: detailed explanations for why an answer was right or wrong, and having access to expert support.
Ah, okay. So the explanations suggest it's about understanding, not just memorizing. And support means you're not just left alone with the material.
Precisely. For them, it seemed to signal a focus on learning the concepts, which, going back to those tricky situational questions, is absolutely vital.
All right, this is where it gets interesting. Let's dive into the exam prep itself. How did they actually use these materials, and what specific features did they point to in the source as making a real difference?
Okay, so based on their chat, several things are important. They felt the questions were really well curated to mimic the actual exam, not just the content, but the format too.
And did it cover the different approaches, like agile and the more traditional stuff?
Yes, they mentioned that specifically. It covered agile, predictive, and hybrid models, basically, the whole spectrum PMI tests on now.
Practicing with questions that feel real must build confidence, right? You sort of know what's coming.
Exactly. And for those really difficult situational questions, the source user said the breakdown of why the answer was right and why the others were wrong was absolutely crucial.
Why was it so important?
They felt it helped them get inside PMI's logic,
Yeah.
understand how they word things, how they want you to think.
Yeah.
It sounds like the real value wasn't just seeing the right answer, but figuring out the reasoning.
Ah, okay. That moves it way beyond just rote learning. What about the timing? That 4-hour pressure cooker?
They mentioned using mock exams that were timed. The source users found this super helpful for building stamina and learning to pace themselves. One called the real exam a marathon.
Good analogy. You definitely need to train for that kind of endurance. Did the materials cover everything? All the exam areas?
According to the source, yeah. They said it covered the main domains. People, which is about your team. Process, like the project steps and methods. And the business environment, the bigger picture context.
The source conversation also mentioned some interactive features.
It did. They talked about an interactive version. It let them do things like flag questions to come back to later, and really importantly, track their progress.
How did tracking progress help?
Well, one user specifically mentioned it helped them see where they were weak. Like they realized risk management was a problem area for them, so they could focus their study time better.
That targeted approach sounds ideal, especially for the person short on time.
It seems like it was a big factor. And they talked about the cost-value trade-off in the source, weighing the price of the materials against the significant cost and hassle of failing the exam.
Right, the retake fees, the extra study time.
Exactly. They felt it was worth the cost because it seemed to boost their odds of passing first time.
Makes total sense. An investment to protect the bigger investment in the certification itself. Did they mention getting help if they got stuck on something?
They did. They actually highlighted the customer support, said they got detailed explanations for tricky questions really quickly, sometimes within hours.
Wow, that quick turnaround when you're stuck mid-study must be incredibly helpful.
It sounds like it. And one of them mentioned something called PMP exam pass support. The source described it as more personalized, like getting a tailored study plan, mock tests focused on your weak spots. They compared it to having a coach.
A coach. Yeah, that implies a much more guided, supportive experience than just buying a book of questions.
Definitely. One other thing they really stressed in the source was the importance of the materials being updated,
Oh, right. Exams change.
especially the PMP. They brought up the 2021 change, which shifted the focus more towards agile and hybrid methods. They were clear that using outdated stuff for this exam is basically useless.
That's a really crucial point. You could waste a lot of time studying the wrong things if your material isn't current.
And the source suggested there was some transparency there, like
Yeah.
a guarantee of updated content or money back, which helped build their trust.
Okay, so this whole package, realistic questions, deep explanations, timed practice, support, updated content. What was the outcome? What did the source say about their exam results?
Well, the source reports clear success. Both users passed the PMP exam.
Fantastic. Was it on the first try?
That's what the source says. Both passed on their first try.
Wow. Considering that high failure rate they mentioned earlier, passing first time is seriously impressive.
It really is. And get this, one of them apparently passed with above target in all domains. That's the best possible score in every section. Just aced it.
That's not just passing, that's dominating the exam. They must have been absolutely buzzing. Did the source capture how they felt?
Oh, yeah. The descriptions were vivid. One said it felt like they'd conquered Everest. Both talked about this intense post-exam high. You know that feeling.
Absolutely. Clearing a hurdle like that is huge. But, as you mentioned, the source indicates their story didn't stop there. They then look towards the job market.
Right. And this is where it gets interesting again, because the source suggests they continued using CertPassCenter, but now for career prep.
How did that work? What did the source say about interview coaching or resources?
They mentioned an interview coaching service. It involved simulated, like, mock interviews. The focus was heavily on those behavioral questions.
Tell me about a time when...
Questions.
Exactly those.
Yeah.
Like, tell me about managing a project risk, or how do you handle stakeholder conflict, stuff like that. Those can be really tough if you're not prepared.
Well, the source user said the coaching helped them prep for exactly those kinds of questions. They also got feedback on body language, apparently. And significantly, they were coached on how to tie answers back to PMI principles.
So, connecting their practical experience to the formal project management standards they just learned for the exam.
That seems to be the idea, making that link clear to interviewers. The source also mentioned a resource hub they used had things like sample interview questions, tips on showcasing your PMP certification effectively.
And did the source mention any specific techniques they learned for answering those behavioral questions?
Yes, it explicitly mentioned the STAR method template. Situation, task, action, result. It's a structured way to give a really solid example.
Right, STAR helps you tell a complete story. So how did all this prep play out in their actual job interviews, according to the source?
They gave some specific examples. One user said they felt so prepared going in. The other talked about naturally using PMI terminology in the interview.
Like specific phrases.
Yeah, they mentioned dropping terms like progressive elaboration, which is about refining project details over time. Doing that naturally seemed to impress the hiring manager.
I bet. It shows you don't just have the certificate, you actually speak the language, understand the concepts deeply.
It sounds like it helped them project confidence and real competence, not just book smarts.
Okay, the bottom line then. What were the career results they shared in the source material?
Pretty significant, according to their account. One user landed a gig at a tech firm, and the source mentioned a 25% salary bump.
25%. That's huge. That really speaks to the value employers saw, both in the PMP and how they presented themselves.
It certainly suggests that. And the other user, they reported getting a job offer just 2 days later for a project manager role at a construction company.
Wow, quick turnaround. So, based on their conversation in the source, they really felt this interview prep was key to getting those offers.
Yes, they seemed to connect it directly. Felt it helped them nail those tough questions, sound confident and competent. The overall vibe from the source was that this approach didn't just get them through the exam, it set you up to own the job hunt.
Own the job hunt. That's a great phrase. Okay, let's try and distill the core advice here based only on what these users shared in the source. What tips did they offer?
Well, the big one for exam prep was don't just memorize the dumps, understand the concepts. They really hammered home the need to use the explanations to get the why.
Right. Use the materials to learn, not just cram. What else for the exam?
Practice under timed conditions.
Yeah.
They kept saying the exam is a marathon, so you absolutely need to simulate that pressure and pace.
Makes sense. You can't sprint a marathon. Any other thoughts on using these tools?
Yeah, a dose of realism. They said the materials are tools, not magic wands. You still have to put in the work. It's the effort plus the tool.
Good point. And for the interview side, what was the key advice there?
They suggested practice articulating your PMP knowledge like you're teaching it. Being able to explain concepts clearly was, for them, crucial to sounding competent in interviews.
That's really solid advice. So this whole narrative from the source, tackling the exam, using specific resources, prepping for interviews, landing better jobs, it really connects back to you, the listener, doesn't it, if you're facing similar challenges?
It absolutely does. Their experience, as laid out in the source, gives insights for anyone navigating tough certifications. It highlights maybe looking for study aids that go beyond just questions, ones that focus on understanding and application.
And it really underscores how important it is to not just get the credential, but to be able to demonstrate that knowledge effectively when you're talking to potential employers. That seems crucial.
Yeah, seeing how this targeted prep for both phases, exam and interview, reportedly led to tangible career gains for them, really illustrates how focused effort, maybe with the right tools, can pay off.
So we followed the thread from the source material you provided. The PMP challenge, the specific prep methods they described using, achieving certification, and then leveraging that into reported career success. It's all drawn directly from their experiences shared in the source.
A pretty complete journey, from study stress to job offer, based on their account.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought sparked by their story in the source. How exactly does that kind of targeted practical preparation, the sort they describe for both the complex exam and the behavioral interviews, build that bridge between just knowing the theory from a book and actually achieving real-world professional success, like getting certified and landing that better job?
It suggests that bridges may be built less on just knowing things and more on deeply understanding them and being able to confidently communicate that understanding when it matters most.
Well put. Thanks again for sharing the sources that allowed us to have this conversation today.